Hello, everybody. Welcome to our 24th talk of this week. I hope everybody has had a good Christmas and we're going on to the new year. You'll be listening to this, and the new year is right tomorrow. So I hope everybody is enjoying their time and having a new year. With me today, I have an artist who I came in contact with through Trisha's Spaces. If you've heard last week's talk, you know that Acacia Victoria, I became aware of their work also through Trisha's Spaces. So if you're looking for great artists to find, go follow Trish. But with me today, I have Patricia Infinity. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Patricia.
Yeah,
All
that's
right,
the correct
perfect,
pronunciation.
perfect. And so to those listening, if I'll give the floor to Patricia. Patricia, please introduce to yourself to the Meta
Hi.
crew.
Hi, nice to meet you all. So yeah, I'm an artist, Spanish based between Ramallah and Los Angeles. I've been working in the West Bank, mainly out of Ramallah for the last 2 years. And I have a background in architecture, but also working in social justice and immersive technologies, as well as documentary XR. And 2 years ago, basically, I started out this project that I didn't know was going to be so crazy. I met this peace activist from a Bedouin village named Khan al Ahmad, and her name is Sada. I met her and I was like, well, I really have to make a VR project inspired by her story. This woman, I mean, I think at age she was about 16 at the time. She was detained because she was trying to protect basically her village from being destroyed, because
Mm,
her village is between two of the largest settlements in the West Bank, and she kind of became like an activist within her community. So I had heard a lot about her before I met her. And in the process, I did all this research about her village and realized that there's so many Bedouin communities within that whole region, that are primarily in Area C of the West Bank, according to the Oslo Accords, that are basically threatened to be demolished. And these people are living a semi nomadic life, which
mhm,
means that they're living off of their sheep. They're living off of like all the food that they make, and still a very, very traditional life that's very linked to the land. And
mhm,
so I was really fascinated by this. I also kind of visited a bunch of Bedouin communities, um, where you really feel like such a connection to the land, that I
mhm,
said, we have to do a VR experience because you only really feel this in a physical, visceral way when you get there, when you're there in those spaces. And you can read about what's happening with these communities, but it's not the same thing when you're really physically there and you start to feel like the spaces are literally shrinking because it's like modern civilization is encroaching upon them. So that's kind of how this VR project
mhm.
started. Hmm.
Yeah. I mean,
Yep.
that was perfect actually. I was like, damn, you already just set my brain off into so many
Okay.
directions.
Okay. I'm glad you interrupted. I was about to go on a long monologue.
um to those listening, like my I immediately what piqued my interest immediately was when you said sort of trying to record and keep alive. I remember this in Trisha's face. You were trying to record and keep alive nomadic cultures and sort of the history these tribes hold, and that's essentially one of like my biggest motivations personally in this space, and some of the biggest motivations of other artists in the space that we've seen come up, was just keeping our cultures alive in this like evolution of popular culture, just our countries, you know, politics, politicians, diplomats, and what they do, and so it immediately piqued my interest, and then to find out that you're working from Ramallah, the West Bank. Um, and I've personally had friends from there, and we've talked a bit about some of the foundations in the Middle East. I was like, we need to talk. Yo, we gotta
Hmm.
sit down and we gotta talk about this because this is essentially sort of, well, what you're building is sort of like one of the end goals of where a lot of us are hoping to go. And um, to those looking at the screen right now, you're looking at some pictures, and the aesthetic that you guys are utilizing also, to me, to record this culture, certain elements of the cultures is actually wild because it's like it's the perfect utilization of popular culture aesthetic and certain like movie aesthetics that we've been used to,
Hmm.
um and then actual like historical recording in the eye from the eyes of artists and people who live there. And to me that's like really great because like I really mess with some of the style that you guys are messing with, and it just aids what you guys are attempting to do so well. Um,
Thank you.
it, to me, it's like, do you guys mess with lidar? Is that very,
Yeah,
what?
so we're so part of the
Mhm,
process, basically, it's very similar. We haven't used LiDAR yet, but it's very, very similar technology. We're just using photogrammetry, which is really just a low-tech version of
mhm,
LiDAR scanning. So it's yeah, photogrammetry is the process of basically creating 3D models, digitizing like real either landscape spaces or objects,
mhm.
through photography. So it's
I-
basically kind of taking those photographs and then, creating the 3D models. But
uh,
also,
mm,
obviously, we're also abstracting it with the point, which it's using point clouds,
mhm.
which not to get like too specific into the 3D modeling stuff, but
Oh,
you know,
I know what those are.
okay, okay, yeah. So we're working with point clouds, so it's
Mm,
not. I personally think sometimes like when you try to make 3D models look too photorealistic, it ends up
mm.
actually just looking like there's the whole uncanny valley situation where you just realize
Really?
that it doesn't actually look exactly as in the real life. So I rather have it actually look abstracted, um, and then it's a different aesthetic, obviously.
Mm,
But I personally think it's more compelling and interesting, as you said. I think we have to kind of take what exists, digitize it, like talk about the cultures that we want to preserve, but how do we do that in a contemporary way and in a way that is, visually, aesthetically relevant? Um, so yeah, I'm always interested in doing that. And I was actually thinking this morning, anyway, the project is still in development, but
mm,
I've done in the past, I've done actually basically like soundscapes with a friend who's a rapper, a Palestinian rapper, and I was like, it would be interesting this is just like a random
mm,
thought that I had today, but there's so many amazing actually also Palestinian women rappers, and I was
mm.
like, it would be really interesting to do some audio because we're working with a lot of different collaborations with different artists with this project. But like I think you just so often expect when you're talking about an old culture that it has to be a certain aesthetic, a certain look, a certain vibe. But I do think it's important to bring a contemporary element to it. Um, so anyway, just a random thought that I had today was
You should
there's
you should see the smile that's on my face right now, because you just reminded me of um one of my favorite boiler room videos. Comes out of this random party in Ramallah, right?
yeah, okay.
Where,
Was it the one with Sama?
yep,
Okay.
because so weirdly enough, I actually got to meet Sema through Adif because she was a trainer there,
Mm-hmm.
and a chaperone there for I think 1 or 2 summers. And to those who are curious, Adif is I think the Arab technology foundation in the Middle East. It's like a really some around those lines. It's like a really great foundation. But I got to meet her through there, and then seeing a boiler room episode out of the
Mm-hmm.
the heart of Ramallah, I was like, no fucking way. And
Mm-hmm.
then to see her play at it, I was like, holy shit, no fucking way. I imagine you've seen it as well.
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, yeah,
It,
it's a famous video.
it's
Yeah, there's an amazing art scene and so much that is being like expressed in terms of I think actually also this is something that people talk about like
mm,
most of the political expression, political movement is happening through music, specifically in the case of the West Bank.
mm,
Um, I think like this particular young generation, their form of like, I guess, I don't know, liberation, whatever you want to call it, or, protesting, has definitely happened much more with the arts than in previous generations. Where I think, yeah, anyway, I think after the second Intifada, there was almost kind of like a disillusion. This is obviously, from my experience as an outsider hearing, learning, different Palestinians talking about it. But I think from the second Intifada, amongst Palestinians in the West Bank and living in Israel as well. There was a disillusionment of protest as a tool for liberation, or because the Second Intifada was such a mess, especially for Palestinians, and didn't actually bring about the changes that they wanted. that I think the next generation then turned to art and to music as a form of protest. And I still think that's one of the most powerful vehicles for Palestinians to tell their stories.
I mean,
Hmm.
I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, like Palestinian art has been around ever since the
Hmm.
problems around Palestine has started. I remember, I think it's Hamda. No, um, how am I blanking out his name right now? He's the kid that will always be nine until well, I'm
What's
blank.
his name?
Give me
So what's it?
well, I'll
What's the
try to.
description?
Oh, so it's a I'm breaking out on the name in English. Like, but it's a little boy. His back is turned. His hands are behind his back. He's sort he's sort of bald with his handada, I think.
And this is a music video?
No, no,
Mm,
no. It's a Palestinian character drawn
okay.
by a Palestinian artist. What is it? Uh, Nagi Salim Ali. Yeah, Naji Salim Ali here. I'll send you. He's a famous Palestinian artist. Like my dad loves his
Okay.
art, and then I
Mhm.
remember growing up around that figure, like being spray painted on the walls in Egypt, and
Mhm.
I'm just pointing it out because it just shows
Mhm.
what is it like just how deep art goes, right? And
Mhm.
within just political movements and just um like
I
political.
haven't seen this before.
You've never seen this before?
I don't think so. No. I mean, I've seen, like, the watermelons that they started, like, drawing, I think maybe during the Second Intifada because they couldn't show the Palestinian flag, so they started like, I've seen stuff like that. The watermelon art, um, but I don't know if I've seen this is like a cartoon, I don't know if I've seen it.
Yeah, so this figure is from the 70s.
Mhm.
Um and it's essentially he's a boy born 10 years old and he will always be 10 years old. It was
Mhm.
at the age of this is the artist who wrote it. He was like it was at the age of that I left my homeland. When
Mhm.
Handala returns, he will still be 10 years old and then he'll start growing up. And I
Mhm.
think he unfortunately got assassinated. Um
Yeah.
yeah, he got assassinated in the UK or something.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean
Super interesting.
it's sort of
Mhm.
like art has been sort of this thing, the language of the people, from the people,
Yeah.
right? And to see you guys sort of like utilize it in a technological way too, because like one of the biggest I realized one of the biggest borders for these old cultures and this new tech is the extreme stylistic gap between the two. We're dealing with like this weird tech that's evolving with like point clouds, cool like abstract animations that are pretty much impossible, right? And
Mhm.
in turn, you look around and you're like, oh, here I am looking at this temple or this really old synagogue or this really old mosque, right? Or
Mhm.
this really old home, and how do I connect both? And then looking at the pictures you guys shared in this land XR, I'm like, yeah, it's perfect because it's like the point cloud and the abstraction sort of also. I mean, well, how do you stylistically view the point clouds? You said that you like the abstraction of it, but how do you personally like view it and how it's like sort of utilized within the work? I'm curious about that.
What do you mean?
Like, like the way I view it, for example, right, is at least for the certain pictures that are utilizing the point clouds, right?
Mhm.
Um, it sort of feels as if you're looking at memories of places, and it really helps utilize like the sense of you're looking at an old culture that's either about to be destroyed, erased, or forgotten, and it's like sort of attempts at keeping it alive, and then stylistically, like it's aided just through the abstraction of the point clouds.
Right. Mhm.
Um, and so I was wondering like how you were viewing sort of the stylistic implications of like the tech,
Yeah. Well, I guess, I think other than the fact that, like, I guess the process or, like, the
Mm,
technology determines the aesthetics, but at the same time, I think a lot of these stories and what's happening in this region, um, it's really important and I think relevant to connect the future with the past
mm,
because it's really about, like, how and it's maintaining a vision for the future, and this is I'm very inspired by, like, Afrofuturism and indigenous futurism movements,
mm,
where, you're looking at different cultures that have been, historically marginalized, and not just looking at the past, but how do you think about the future within the context of the past, and specifically and I guess, yeah, it's really, like, creating a relationship between past and future,
mm,
and currently with what's happening now, how do you create this past-future relationship within a current state where the present is at risk? Meaning, like, the future seems dire, but then rather than lose hope
mm.
or say, "Okay, there's no future here," how do you then create some alternative future? Um So anyway, that's I think that's where kind of a lot of this the inspiration is coming from and is like the interest in relating future visions, possibilities with the past. And also for me in this particular
Mm,
working with a lot of these communities, like rural communities in the area, I mean, sometimes you just have like, I don't know how to explain it. It's like you just have conversations with people where everything seems so hopeless that I think the only possible thing we can do is not just to talk about what are the problems in the present, but how do we actually empower these communities to continue to tell their stories and
mm.
to do so with a vision of the future. That's their vision, not an outsider's vision, but their vision. Um so that's what it kind of those are some of the ideas that have really inspired the work. And there I also like through this process I started meeting some people that became involved with the project who were digitizing, who were very interested in digitizing like Palestinian cultural heritage, and they're still doing that. But yeah, so I think this vision about the future is really important to bring in to this type of place and kind of, I guess, conflict situation, oppressive military situation,
Well,
if that makes sense.
it makes perfect sense because it
Mhm.
also just like it puts the power of representation within the hands of the people
Mhm.
themselves, right? You're no longer at the bay of the photography given to you by the tourist photographer or the
Yeah.
journalistic photographer,
Yeah.
who might have other sort of political agendas, right? They could be there.
Mhm.
I care about the people, but we sort of know, yeah, you're gonna sell those photos, right? And so you're gonna make money off of our suffering, culture, pain, you know, um, what is it? Just suffering, right? Whatever it
Mhm.
is, like it,
Yeah.
it's been sort of fed into this weird capitalistic machine, and so part of the empowerment is like, all right, you've been looking at a camera for long enough. Time for you to utilize the camera instead
Mhm.
of being the subject at the end of it.
Right. And I do think I
Mm,
think that that's also just where we are as a society where yeah, it's not about so I also, I am an outsider. And so also when coming into these communities for me, I'm always like really careful and I'm always questioning my role
mm,
and making sure like how do I like being very clear like my role is there as a facilitator
mm,
and um and I think, this particular year, like you've seen like this amazing rise of like Palestinian voices on a global stage that you hadn't seen in a few years. And I think what was really beautiful is like really Palestinians speaking up for themselves without mediators, And so I see that that's my role very much like in this project. I'm just sort of like bringing in the creative technology, the tools, the methods, and then one to tell this story and then to eventually also just to have the communities themselves be doing it on their own directly through the blockchain. And that's, I think, what the beauty and like part of what is like so fascinating about working with this within this like NFT Web3 space is that it really allows for the communities themselves to be the ones speaking for themselves, to be the ones connected to the web. Um, yeah.
And I would also add, like, it opens up the doors for, say, well, people here will, can call it job opportunities, but creative opportunities and career pursuits that
Mhm,
we wouldn't have thought possible, and also the implications that that would allow, right? Because
mhm.
um it was crazy. When I'm probably gonna butcher his name, but when Virgil
Yeah.
Ebola died.
Mhm,
I didn't know who he was because I'm not that big into fashion personally, but through me talking to some of my friends, I found out that he was the first and only black sort of director and like dude who runs a high end fashion company.
mhm,
Right. And I was like, what do you mean? They're like, yeah, he started off white and then he started doing work for Louis Vuitton and did his thing. And to me, it's like, all right, so we essentially got to see how impactful one person who has never been given a voice get given a voice, and like how much they've changed the fashion industry. And the whole fashion industry in itself, for example, is just built on just that cultural theft anyways. We'll take your fabrics and we'll take your patterns, and that's it. And so it's like you also are opening up the doors for more than just recording, certain cultures, as people get to actually evolve, showcase their cultures, and then build upon it. And then you never know, they might actually be are the ones in the future controlling how certain elements of artistic fields, operate. Right. Same thing with the musicians. Like, it's crazy to me that Sama, for example, is as big as she is, because growing up in Egypt, it's like, can we get that big? Are
mhm.
Middle Easterns allowed to get that big? And then to see somebody get that big, it's like, oh, okay, all right. And
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. I think Virgil was definitely, I mean, a legendary man who
mm,
created a beautiful legacy, yeah, for sure, to show what's possible. Um, I was following his work for a while and I didn't I think it's funny. I think for like this whole year I was following him and I didn't quite understand like what
mm,
he was doing. It just seems like so many people in culture were inspired, affected by him. That I think only once he passed, I started just looking more into like what he had done, and I started just listening to some of his talks, and he was definitely a really inspiring creative visionary. So yeah, it's a cool story.
it is, and it's like I think he's like it's one of those, like, he's sort of the figure that you sort of tie to your national identity, right? He's one of the figure that starts to establish a sort of identity that identity archetype, if you will, that you can follow for a specific group of people, which happen to be
Mhm,
Black Americans, right? And then
mhm,
for musicians, for at least for Middle Eastern musicians, we got, Sama, we got what is it, Mashru' Layla, right? We have
mhm,
Karaoke, all these bands that are getting big enough are creating this sort of like national archetypes for people to like follow and like start to build upon.
mhm.
And you sort of don't realize how big they are until they pass away, because then all the people that are inspired by them, the spotlight has now been turned on them, right?
Right, right, right.
And so it's like I really look forward to that part of your project, because like we're gonna start to get to see more than culture, right? Because like
Mhm,
we're gonna start like music, fashion, like whatever you guys tackle, it's all gonna be from like valid eyes, right? It like you
mhm,
said, it's facilitated by the outsider. And I myself hate using the word the outsider, just because it just like it creates like this weird like edge between us, right? When it's like
mhm.
when we're helping each other, right? But it's like
Right.
we're being helped, at least, like, I don't know, call it the facilitator gaze, if you will, instead of the outsider gaze, because it's a completely different sort of look and perception and utilization of perception. But through that also, right, it starts to help, and then slowly people can pick it up on their own, and right through future generation the work starts to develop, right? And so
Mhm.
um, it's also good that you're like it's like I keep saying this in a lot of talks, but like those who are aware of their position in the cycle, right, are able to
Yeah. Well,
to
I mean,
change. Mm.
I think I think in the case of Palestine, like it is such a delicate, like it is so delicate to enter as a, in
Mm.
my, like in my, as who I am, it is so delicate, and I do think it's so and I've been aware. I mean, I've done so many different collaborations with different Palestinian artists organizations, so I'm very very aware of that.
Mm.
um and it's very delicate because Palestinians have been kind of utilized, I mean, like the culture has been, like the effects of colonialism on the culture has been incredibly extractive, and then I mean the economy, like just so many terrible things have happened, as a result of colonialism in this area, and it's affected culture, it's affected the economy.
I
um, you know
I
that, I mean, even
mm.
today the arts and culture scene there, it's just, I mean, it still basically kind of relies on like this sort of aid model, that is not helpful. It's not like it's not helpful within today's context of like true emancipation and liberation.
Is
Um, mhm.
I agree with you, and I really like the word extractive. I really like how you use that word. That's actually I've never heard it sort of utilized in that way when it comes to colonialism, and I actually really like it because it sort of fits the description of what legitimately has happened in some areas, and it sort of fits also like the extraction of just like artistic themes or the cultural themes, cultural depictions, religions, knowledge,
Yeah,
and
yeah. There was. I don't know if you're
Mhm.
familiar with Edward Said, but he
Oh
was a
yeah,
Palestinian. Yeah.
he I haven't fully read his book Orientalism, but it was one of we read parts of it in my art history class, and I've
Hmm.
mentioned that a few times
Yeah, I
to
think I'm
friends
always
and
kind of aware. Like, I mean, yeah, he always talked about like the Oriental gaze and how much
mhm,
we've Orientalized, the Middle East and Palestine. And
it's
so I
true.
think, I guess even going back to this point cloud thing, it's also just being aware, like how, how is the culture, how is the thing being represented? Like, let's not kind of, rely on these like Oriental tropes. Um,
It's
and that's been something that just I've also have had to be, very aware of. Obviously in conversations as the project has developed, because yeah, it's just so interesting. Like, I mean, when you get an outsider coming in, the the aesthetics that you get are very Oriental, but then you actually look at the art that is coming out of the region, and it's completely different. It's just, yeah, it's
it's true.
contemporary. It's not kind of like simplistic.
It's
Um, mhm.
I can't believe we're talking about Edward Said right now. I tell this to my girlfriend. Art history classes follow me everywhere,
Yeah. I mean, yeah,
and
Edward Said, he comes up all the time
it's
with all these types of projects.
it's true. I mean he directly influenced my work because like
Mhm.
I mean my biggest thing is like the sort of extraction, right, that has happened. Like
Mhm.
when I went to art history classes, right, I got told, like the genius no longer exists. That's a colonialist, white supremacist concept, and the Orientalist paintings are fake and all of that, and it's also a colonialist concept. And my biggest thing was like, let's just make it fair game for all the fucking cultures out there, right? Like it's no longer Picasso was a genius. It's like, yeah, Picasso was a genius, and then let's include, the Middle Eastern artists who are geniuses along the pillars of geniuses as well. Let's include the female artists. And so my biggest thing, I was like, how do I'm not gonna throw down because I mean personally I fucking love Orientalist paintings. I don't I think
Mhm.
it's my dad because my dad really loves them, and I grew up looking at paintings of the carpet market that everybody
Mhm.
knows that are fake as hell. But it's like
What are
yeah.
you mean like paintings of a bazaar in Egypt or something, in like
Yeah, like
Cairo?
there's like the
Okay.
bizarre, like those like
Yeah.
random paintings where it's like it has
Mhm.
10 different like patterns from three different countries, like weird dress, and you're like, okay, bro, like you're just flexing your painting skills. Um,
Yeah.
but it's like my thing was like I have so much love for that sort of depiction style that I was like, I'm not gonna throw it away. I'm just gonna utilize it for my culture because
Yeah.
it tried to utilize mine. Now I have to
Mhm.
utilize it, right? It's like that,
Right.
and
Yeah, like, I think it's not like we don't wanna kind of, like, lay it to the side, like, yeah,
mhm,
but still, like, be very, very aware of how these images have been used across history, and then how do we engage with them differently today in a way that's critical, right? Like, understanding, yeah, like, a lot of these images have been taken from, like, a colonial gaze, and then, they've been like, understanding what that history is
mhm,
of extraction, and then saying, okay, how can we still, like, we're not going to necessarily dump the aesthetic because it is beautiful. I agree. I mean, in Spain we also have like beautiful architecture,
it's
um
true.
from the Islamic Empire, that it's like, it's very kind of kitschy, meaning like it's the typical thing that you imagine, the tiles, like it's very, very kind of traditional, and
True.
yet but let's engage with it in a very critical way, um so that we understand, like, yeah, each of our respective roles in, right, like in the image making process, um yeah, and yeah. Hmm.
I mean, well, I am now I'm really excited for the future of your work because we're on the same path. I mean, like on Twitter yesterday, I was talking to somebody about this fucking PFP project called Arabian Camels, and both of
Hmm.
us were like, "Oh my god!" And I literally remember that project popping up 6 months ago, and I was like, "What the fuck is this shit? Like seriously?" And the whole kitsch was it was like, buy these Arabian Camels PFPs, and we'll like make a movie in the Middle East. And I was like, no fucking way. It
Do
was
you
so
know who made them?
Oh, I don't even remember their username. It's like I'm numb to it at this point. I've seen so much weird shit
Yeah,
in
I
this
mean, I guess
phase.
that's the strange thing about this space, is that there's almost like no. I mean, I think nowadays, for example, you go to art spaces, and there's many, many of them are incredibly aware. Like,
Hmm.
where have I don't know. There's been some recent museums where like they started talking, like actually saying, like, this has been stolen from Egypt, or like
Well,
they'll talk about the legacy, the
so
colonial legacy, and they'll start to reveal it. But I
well,
think the NFT space is just not there yet.
yeah. So one thing I've noticed about the NFT space is it's sort of like it's born out of rejection of the fine art space. So
Mhm.
we still have a fair ways to go before the
Yeah,
same like critiques and analysis are gonna
right.
be applied. And then I also have like my own personal gripes about these museums like posting up this stuff because I'm like it's just like it's
Mm,
like
they still
it
have them.
well it's that and it's just like more I'm like oh like stop it with this whole pandering stuff you don't care and it's like I know the work but it's like I didn't go to see this work to like be reminded like I know the history of it. Let's just stop this like fake like diplomatic play between each other
Yeah.
and let's just
Mhm.
keep the water clear. You're here to take off the culture. Let's just like, come on, and it just
Right.
like it's like yeah, it's that sort of like like I forget that like just like I call it diplomatic bullshit, but it's like just that weird stuff where you're like, come on, like I don't
Yeah.
get and
Mhm. Yeah, I think you see that a lot in the case of Palestine, but, I mean, in some ways, it's better to have a dialogue and to talk about this than not to, and I
it's
totally
true,
agree with you. Yeah, that sometimes it's really just sort of like greenwashing initiatives, like, it just looks politically correct.
pretty much.
And that's it. But I do think, I did hear about a museum. I think it was in Spain actually. They
Hmm.
they just returned. I don't remember where. Like they had some like old. I don't know, like some like remnants of some like ruins. Maybe I don't know where it was exactly, but they decided to return them to their country of origin recently. So like, I mean, I thought that was cool. Like that's they're really returning it.
Yeah, it's
So I mean, I think if there's initiatives like that happening, like I think that's great, you know?
I know
Um, so yeah, for sure. But yeah, we just always have to be like, okay, really like, I mean, are you just greenwashing the thing, or are you really doing something to change the
exactly
the dynamic?
exactly, and it's like also my biggest thing is just like allow, even if you want to keep it, allow the people who you took it from access to it, and
Yeah.
allow
Mhm.
and more access than just looking at it um in your white space, right? And to those listening, a white space literally just means the museum, right? We call it the white space because typically, the walls are white. It has its sort of own rules, historical rules that you sort of play by, right? And like display rules, and it's very official, and it has its own sort of like artistic implications and fine art historical implications, right? And so it's like it's I mean.
You know what this reminds me of?
Mhm.
We were talking about Uncyber before, and it doesn't Uncyber. I mean, Uncyber is like, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's still they're literally replicating the white spaces, right?
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it's supposed to be futuristic, but we're replicating those same white spaces that are sort of outdated in the physical world. So anyway, there's also, I think, an opportunity to think about, yeah, like, I think it's so important to have these conversations inside of the NFT space because not enough thought has been put into some of the platforms and projects
I
that exist in this space, including on cyber. Like, why replicate a system that is not maybe so relevant anymore?
I agree with you in the looks of it.
Mhm.
The one thing I like about One Cyber is, well, I mean, personally, I just treat it as I make my official shows for myself, and I put them in my artistic CV, and
Mhm.
I no longer care about the officialness, right, of the actual like physical white space or the gallery or the museum.
Mhm.
Because what makes a fucking museum more official than my fucking bedroom? Like it's still a fucking wall. And
Mhm.
sorry, your money spent on temperature control. Cool. Like we'll get to there when we got the money, But it's like other than that,
Mhm.
there is to me, it's like I've literally, and I noticed it because at some point in my own university, I was asking somebody, I was like, oh, does any show that happened on university grounds like considered an official show? And they're like, yeah. And I was like, why? Because it just happened on university? And they're like, well, yeah. I was like, really? Well, that's just the fuck. Like, my show happened in a fucking 1 meter by 1 meter room, for example. Like, that's my show. That's my official show. Yeah, you can put that on your CV. Oh, okay. And then they tell you, like, that's the game you play. And so it's like, oh, so we're playing with, like, random fuckery and bullshit from the start, And
Mhm.
so here comes this on cyber. And I do hate some of the looks of it. It can be very restrictive at times. But now it's like, I no longer have to go to the gallery and be like, hey, can I have your white space? I got mine, and I
Right.
can. Now
Mhm.
there are really like the weird implications with you buying like the space, but it's still like the free spaces are like, to me, I think it's like the first step into somebody realizing,
Yeah.
oh, I can do this on my own. I can no longer pray at the gallery and be like, well, not pray, be a prey to the gallery system and all that. Um,
Right.
and I think it's also like it would also be great for places that don't have a functioning art gallery or a museum, or that can't have the funding for it, right? In places like Ramallah and
Mhm.
all those places that are starting to like the cultural institutions, if you will, right? The places where are lacking those, you can sort of onboard some digitally and have them visitable on location, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's actually something that a friend is working on right now. Um, Not exactly, well, because I mean, I think I would say the other thing that happens inside of the West Bank as well is that the art, I guess the culture is incredibly kind of monopolized, and there's like a few sources of funding. There's literally one curator that determines, what arts and culture projects get funded. And
Jesus.
and I personally think that that's terrible for, like, like the healthy the development of a culture ecosystem. Um, so anyway, I have some friends who have a space that they've been using for a lot of music venues, and they do a lot of collaborations with music artists, um, where they're interested in basically, like, they're starting to ask themselves this question of, especially because so many of the people there and the people running this space, it's so difficult for them to move around with the green ID there. that they're looking at ways to basically connect that physical space virtually to other spaces, so that on the one hand, Palestinian artists who are based there, who are kind of landlocked, they can collaborate with other artists in other parts of the world virtually. And, and also so that some of the art and the culture can be experienced by outsiders. So anyway, that's like a project that um, I'm sort of helping. I mean, I'm very, very outside helping, but I'm really excited about this particular project, because I think it's really important, um, like to acknowledge that there's like geographic blocks. There's a wall surrounding them,
Mhm.
and obviously like a military occupation where it's so difficult to move around that then we start having these virtual tools that actually enable collaboration. They enable viewing. So anyway, if you have ideas for that, let me know. They're
Oh,
they're just currently exploring that. So
I mean, have you looked into VR chat?
yeah,
Ooh,
we're looking at like different tools, and we're still trying to figure out a lot. But yeah, we've
it's
seen. Mhm.
I'll also connect you with I'll try to connect you with some of the people that I know. Like I'll try to connect you with the head of Adif actually, because they know a bunch of like I believe the head of Adif Ronwa is Palestinian,
Oh,
um,
nice.
or
Okay.
Rania is Palestinian,
Yeah.
and she
Mhm.
knows. And I met a couple of Palestinians in her camp, and
Cool.
they've gone on to do like some pretty gnarly stuff. Like one of them is doing, I believe, like art shows
Nice.
in Europe and stuff, or like sorry, dance shows like on
Mhm.
theater and stuff. And so it's like I'll connect you with stuff with
Yeah.
uh, because
Nice.
um
Mhm.
it's also like one of the biggest thing that the Metakey is about, right? Is it's like the team is based out of Australia, but we have buyers from all over the world, and the whole thing is built, on access to like you know special areas and VIP access and stuff, but part of that is aided in the virtual space, right? And so
Right.
um it, to me it's like it's like what you guys are doing is actually perfect, because it's essentially what the space is sort of gearing up towards.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
like it's sort of the thing that's already enabled a bunch of people to build what's been built, right? And so
Mhm.
now we get we're getting fresh minds and new eyes. And it's like just looking at the work already, like, well, are we going to get to see some of this in Decentraland?
You're saying that in this land?
No, in Decentral, yeah, in this land, are we going to get to see some of like the point cloud models in Decentraland, for
Um,
example?
I mean, the idea is to eventually bring it, like, once the experience is complete, to bring it into a metaverse platform. But
Mm,
the problem is some of them have like really the point clouds are really heavy. Um, so
mm,
anyway, it just depends on. We might like. I think once it's all complete. Right now, we're just focusing on finishing the VR production, which includes like the animation, it includes like the interactivity, as well as just the final kind of like the completion of the script and all of and sound. But once it is complete, or even maybe in the process, like we might have like some of the models or animation. But yeah, it just depends. The problem is some of it is some of what like their specifications inside of some of these platforms are just really low. So
mm.
that, I mean, it just depends. But yeah, I mean, that's the idea, is to bring it into metaverse native platform. And I think the technology is changing so quickly that, who knows, in a few months, it's just we'll bring it wherever we can show it at like the highest possible resolution. And obviously wherever it can be most attractive as well.
Yeah, because to me it's like I'm actually excited to see when your exhibition opens. I know I've said that so many times in the talk, but it's
Yeah.
just to those looking at the screen, you're looking at the sort of work, and you're looking at these point clouds, and it's like, um, so well, I know that look good in 3D space, because funny enough, my one of the first NFTs I ever bought on Hicketnunk was a photogrammetry of a grave in Brazil. Because this dude was just photo scanning graves in Brazil, and
Hmm.
it's like I think this grave from like 1780 something or 1870 something, and
Hmm.
it's done in point clouds as well, but like the point clouds are limited, and in the 3D space on Cyber, it looks fucking amazing. And
Oh, okay,
so
that's good to know. Mhm.
yeah, oh, so I don't know if you knew this, but uh, on Cyber supports GLB files. So
Okay.
if you export your point cloud into a GLB file,
Mhm.
um, you I don't know what program 3D modeling program you use, but if say you're using Blender and you use like the modifier that takes the amount of polygons away, I forget the name of it right now. But there's like a specific modifier in Blender that literally allows you to take like the level of detail like and lower it in your
Mhm.
model. And then
Yeah.
once you export that as a GLB file and have it minted on
Yeah, I mean,
OpenSea.
we've actually I mean, we have different models, but we have I mean, we've had, like, so many adventures with Blender. But yeah, I mean, there's also so many different softwares, like, Blender literally crashes every time we import because these point clouds are like, some of them are just crazy. Um, so obviously something good and bad about it that, high fidelity, like, really immersive when you're actually in it.
Mm,
But then obviously, can just totally crash a program. So even we've used a bunch of those plugins and it still crashes Blender. But yeah, I mean, there's different software like where Unreal Engine, for example, is actually much better at working with point clouds because they just released like a
sorry, which
lighter
program?
Unreal Engine, which is more of a
Oh,
gaming
Unreal.
gaming
Yeah, okay.
platform. hmm
Unreal
But yeah,
5?
it works. Yeah, I don't remember what the latest. Yeah, I guess I mean, the latest one has a plugin
Mm,
specifically for lidar, like working with heavy point clouds, because
nice.
that's yeah, what we have is really pretty large. So.
Because I've been looking, I'm so jealous of people with iPhones because they have
Oh
LiDAR scanners on their phone.
yeah, I have I have an iPhone, but my iPhone is an old. Like right, I think that
Oh,
it's the model right before the lidar scan came out. Um,
it's
yeah,
like, it's the
it's
most
cool.
perfect thing.
hmm
And
Yeah.
like to me, yeah, LiDAR also just happens to like really fit the technology and the aesthetic of the tech so well.
hmm
It's like the future of like this weird matrix cyberpunk cultural like infusion of just like aesthetics, right? Because the patterns and the colors can carry through, but then it's all point cloud, and then you have the whatever sort of sky block you put the model in. If you put it in a sky block,
hmm
right, or if you
Yeah.
export it, whatever world it's in, it's just like it can
Yeah.
connect so many things together.
Yeah,
Um,
and also, I mean, I guess not to mention, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out now, and we're trying to find like the right tech partners for this, is also like the right shaders for the point clouds so that they animate. Depending on what you use, like the visuals can also change so much. They can go from I mean, like
Hello? Mhm.
animations. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, you just went silent
Okay.
there for a second.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, just animations with like point cloud using different shaders. Like, I mean, I guess depending on the engine that you use, they're different kinds, but
Mhm.
um it's pretty amazing what you can create. So I mean, like that, yeah, I guess right now what you see is just the point clouds without the shader, but once we put the right shader, we're going to
Oh,
start experimenting with the shaders soon.
oh,
So,
okay.
mhm.
That's gonna be fun to see because
Yeah.
I know Rafik Andal, his work is
Oh
all
yeah.
point cloud
Mhm.
based.
Yeah,
Um,
I mean, yeah, he's super talented. Has a huge
it's
studio.
it's like when I found out the man built his own custom screens, I was like, you can do that? You can build your
Mhm.
own custom screens?
Yeah, he's
She,
sort of a genius.
yeah, and it's like, but here's the cool thing. Well, have you checked out the Radiohead exhibit? The
I know
video.
I haven't where is it?
So if you have if you have a good computer, it's on the Epic Game Store. It's a
Okay,
digital exhibit that's been built in Unreal Engine,
okay.
and
I'll have to check it out.
it's like, well, it's pretty much you can pull off everything Rafik does in a virtual space and 10 times more in like the
Mhm.
most artistic way. And it's just, I mean, I'm a big fan of Radiohead, so I was like, my brain was blowing, like was exploding left and right because I'm just like,
Yeah,
whoa. But it like the sort of artistic freedom that we are given in the virtual space, it can actually utilize point clouds in like the gnarliest of ways. And it's
yeah.
like, I mean, eh, just when you start to mix, like virtual reality with augmented reality, right? And that's where XR comes in and it becomes extended reality. Then
Mhm.
it's just like a completely different game because you guys can essentially have like moving 3D sculptures that people can buy and set in the middle of their home,
Yeah.
that are made from by the hands of Palestinians or people from these nomadic tribes that then are animated, right? Get
Mhm.
geotagged so that your phone picks up on them when you're just near them, right? And they're like, say
Right.
they're in your home, and then they just start to play, and it's like
Mhm.
you put that on your AR glasses, and you can see it, and you're like, you got your sculpture in your fucking apartment moving, you know, it breaking infinity, right? It's like,
Right.
I mean, I right? Like it's sort of like that would be cool. No, am I just?
I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean, I think also, it's interesting. There's this whole conversation about like VR, XR, and like the project actually started as a VR experience for headset.
Mm.
And then as the time has gone, like, I mean, so many, there's also just such a criticism of VR itself. And I think, I mean, yeah, we really do have to, we're going more towards an XR future. Um, I think because I mean, XR because mainly because it's just more accessible
Mm.
with different kinds of devices. And yes, so I do think it's powerful and it's important to be able to access this work. Whether like the idea of this project is to be able to access with headset the narrative experience, but also to be able to have like, yeah, some of that work, that 3D work also available like through different XR um, tools. So yeah, that's a good vision, the one that you have about having it in the living room.
I mean, I look forward to it because it's like I legitimately think like I think we're thinking along the same way where it's like that's where the future is headed. Every like
Mhm.
I mean every sort of indication that I've seen so far is that's legitimately where we're going, and so I'm just excited for like the shit that we're gonna be able to see from like from everybody, not right,
Mhm.
just from the European countries, the Western countries, and even the Latin American countries, Middle Eastern countries, North African countries, all of it, all
Yeah.
every region in the world, right? And it just the sort of like cultural and identity creation that's going to get formed, you know, for each country, but also like the global, because the internet is sort of like global culture, right? Because everybody
Yeah.
knows memes, everybody uses memes, and so like the infusion of all these cultures in the future, right, to like create one sort of internet global culture is gonna be like
Mhm.
is gonna be something cool to me, because it's like
Yeah.
the metaverse is gonna be like the wildest fucking place. Like
Mhm. Well, I think that's where, like, on the one hand, you have the really utopian ideals of like decentralization, like diversity of Web3
mm,
that I think are really, really exciting, and we are starting to have tools that like legitimately can democratize the playing fields across the world, regardless of like history or what's happened in each place. Um, and so I think that there's like that's possible, and then on the other hand, I mean, then there's I was following the whole Twitter conversation between the Twitter, what's his name? Jack, right? The
oh,
Jack,
Jack,
the Twitter
Twitter
guy.
Jack,
What
yeah,
Jack Dorsey, right? Yeah, that's his
yeah,
name. Okay. Like he was really criticized. I mean, and it's true, right? I mean, sometimes we also just don't know exactly what's going on. You know,
I,
I mean, who knows what's going to happen if it is, I believe like if a lot of these Web3 companies are being funded by like traditional VCs that have been funding like tech startups run by like a few white men, then just because these new companies are being developed inside of Web3, which is, and they're touting like these ideas of decentralization, like if the money is coming from the same sort, like places, and that's going to have an impact on, on the power structures, then I think we have to stay
well,
optimistic and also like be be wary, and really pay attention to how how these ideals are really. like, and just continuously asking, like, is democratization and is decentralization really at play here or not,
I,
right? And um, anyway, I think it's going to be interesting.
I
It will be definitely interesting.
yeah, I think it's
Hmm.
gonna be interesting when we actually fully see like full true decentralization
Hmm.
and all of that. But I also think Jack has just been drinking too much fucking Bitcoin Kool-Aid, honestly.
Yeah,
That
I mean,
man
then
has
there's the
been
whole
like
right. I mean,
Bitcoin
yeah, he
maximalist
has,
for like 10
I
years.
I do agree he has the whole Bitcoin versus Ethereum versus blah. Like, there's that whole thing. But what I do agree with is like, okay, I mean, he's also just really pointing the finger at like, okay, it's these very traditional VC companies that are funding like the majority of Web3 companies. That's a problem, you know.
Oh no, no,
Like,
I agree with you there. Like
mhm,
I think a lot of us have realized that as well. Like that there is a bunch of like bank money and venture capitalist money behind a bunch of these sort of like you know in between quotation mark decentralized platforms.
mhm,
Um, and it's like for that, it's like I think the people who understand or have been here for a year, right? Like they're aware that it's like I mean, I personally, I'm aware that it's like once like these platforms have a time, right? And like I mean, for Foundation specifically, like I know Foundation has a bunch of money behind it, and there is a specific reason why they're acting as a company the way they are, right? And it's just sort of like like it's like we're abiding by it until the alternative is developed because the alternative is being developed, and it's like we sort of treat it as it's like all this like fake decentralized or at least the way I view it as like the semi-decentralized venture capitalist funded stuff is like how you dip your toes into the water in the idea of
mhm,
decentralization. And when you realize, oh, it's not full true decentralization, you start to,
mhm,
okay, how do I get my own smart contract up? How do I do
mhm,
that? And so that's how I think how it works. And it's like, or how it's like how people should like look at it, in the sense of like be aware of that. Yeah, some of the shit isn't what it is,
mhm.
but it's like some of it also allows you. It's like once you're aware of it, you start to look for like, oh, what is truly decentralized and what's there.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, and I just
And
think
then
like,
yeah.
yeah,
And then there's also the question is of like, do we really want to decentralize everything? Meaning,
exactly,
like, is that the right thing to do? But I guess the question for me is like, okay, really making sure like, is the wealth really like equal, distributed
yeah,
across like, different communities and not just amassed? And what you do see in the NFT and the crypto space still is like, there's like a few people that own the
exactly.
majority
No, I
of
agree
the
with you.
wealth, and that's a problem.
Yeah,
So how do you ensure like that wealth gets like equal,
yeah,
um
and it just
distributed?
yeah, I'm with you. Like you just have to choose what needs to be decentralized and or like what should
Mhm.
be decentralized and what shouldn't, right? Like
Right.
if somebody tells me the cops should be decentralized, I'm gonna tell you no. Like no way. Well, excuse me? Like oh sorry, user fucking like Little Pants has submitted 20 million votes against the cops entering and stopping this riot. Sorry, no can do. Well,
Mhm.
fuck no, right? Or it's like so I agree with you. Like some stuff should never be decentralized, but
Mhm.
and some stuff legitimately should be decentralized. And so
Mhm.
it's like once the space like the space does have a lot of work ahead of it. Like we like to
Yeah.
celebrate the money, but we're
Mhm.
still so early, and there's still so many problems that need to be ironed out and fixed and addressed.
Yeah.
But yeah,
That's why I mean, yeah, I'm excited about developing my project, and I'm excited about having more of these conversations because I do think we need, yeah, we just need more thoughtful, like I feel like the other day I was in a Twitter space where I was like, I was like, I feel like I'm intruding, and I'm like, we do need like thoughtful intrusions into this space, you
yeah,
know.
it's true.
Um,
It's
so
true. Twitter
mhm.
Spaces can be weird at times.
Yeah.
You need somebody to come and be like, "Hey, yo, listen, let me lay it down on you," and then everybody's like, "Whoa, I never thought of it like that."
Mhm.
Well, Patricia, thank you for
Thank
coming
you so
on.
much. Thank
this
you
was
so much.
legitimately fucking great. I didn't expect us to talk about Edward Said or the Orientalist gaze or any of that. I was like, yo, we're just gonna talk about some cool aesthetic stuff, you know, and maybe touch on some cultural stuff. And then I was like, hold up, Edwards, okay, let's go. I know this. I studied some of this. Maybe not too well, like, you know, my art history grades were not that good, but you know, I just
But you
thought
got
art
it.
history. Yeah. Listen, I just thought art history was a bit too boring. Okay, like I'm sorry, but it was just like, come on, prof, like you gotta. I want to be painting. That was my thing. um, but again, thank you for coming on. I've
Thank you so
included
much.
your Twitter below and the
Oh,
in this land XR Twitter as well as your nowhere to govern or
no, we're left.
nowhere to gov or nowhere left to gov
Yeah, we have
governor.com.
just a secret. We have to change the domain for that. So
Okay,
just
well,
keeping it in this Landex
all right,
in
well,
process.
there will be the official website,
Yeah.
and then
Mhm.
once that website updated, I will come back and re-update the description to fit
Cool.
it.
Thank you so
Um,
much.
and yeah, everybody go follow Patricia, go follow In This Land. Keep an eye
Hmm.
out for when this stuff launches, and I'll also we will talk in DMs in the future, and like we'll probably like I'm pretty sure we will have you on again at some point. What
Yeah.
you're
So
doing
it's
is way too cool.
Yeah, so it's in this Landexar for the Twitter, and also like if anyone like we are looking for collaborators as well to continue to work as we release the some of the aspects of the piece. So really open to hearing from like anyone reaching out.
Yep, perfect.
Mhm.
And